Jay Greenblatt, welcome. My name is Cynthia Anstey. I'm with Stockton University, and today we're going to do an interview for our oral history with the Alliance Heritage Center. I have to read a question just to make sure that we are approving everything. And my name is Cynthia Anstey, and I'm interviewing Jay Greenblatt. Today is November 8th, 2024. We are at Stockton University, and we are completing an oral history interview for the Alliance Heritage Center of Stockton University. And Jay Greenblatt, do you give permission for this interview to be recorded and made available for education and research purposes through the Alliance Heritage Center? Yes or no?
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to try and keep it around 40 minutes, but if it goes longer, that's fine. If there's no answer to the question, that is also fine. And if you wouldn't mind maybe just giving us a little background of who you are and how you have come to know the Alliance Heritage Center.
Okay. Well,
let's start in a different way. Let's start with the day that you walked into the synagogue. You've moved to Centerton with your wife. You have a little boy.
Well, let me preface it with
Certainly.
this, if I may. All right. Some background on me, because the day I walked into that synagogue, the Brotmanville synagogue, the effect it had on me is based on who I was at that time. So my father was born in Brotmanville. He was one of 11 children, and I think 6 of them were born in Russia and 5 in the United States, in Brotmanville. My grandfather, for whom I was named, came here a couple of years after the original settlers founded Alliance Colony. And he was a carpenter at the time, and he built many of the buildings in the colony, and especially helped build the Brotmanville Synagogue, where my father eventually was bar mitzvah. My father was born in 1896 in Brotmanville. I learned a lot about the life there just through conversations within the family. As I grew up, Brotmanville had the Morris River there, and the Morris River had a beach Brotmanville had, the Alliance Colony had, Alliance Colony Beach was there. It was our beach. In other words, if we said we were going to go to the beach, we weren't going to Atlantic City. We were going to Norma, New Jersey, which was part of the Alliance Colony. And that's where I spent most of my days as I was growing up. There was a jukebox, there was a pinball machine, there were penny sticks of pretzels with mustard, and it was really it was very, very nice.
Sounds festive.
In any event, as I got older, I could actually, from Vineland on my bicycle, it was nothing for a kid at 10 or 11 years old to ride out to Brotmanville. It was a half an hour perhaps by bicycle. And I keep saying Brotmanville, but I mean the Alliance Colony. Alliance Colony was Brotmanville, Norma, and the area in between. They were all part of Alliance Colony. You think of Brotmanville and Norma as the suburbs of Alliance Colony. In any event, so I knew something about the area. To me, it was where my father came from. All of my aunts and uncles who were still alive, of his siblings, spoke of the area. When I was a child and until I was about 13 years old, my grandmother, My grandfather had died the year before I was born. My grandmother was alive, and so I knew that she was a product of that colony. It was kind of mysterious to me because the modern life that I lived at the time, it was nothing like what they lived then. But I got to understand that. Have you ever seen it's on TV again now, the reruns, little John Boy, Little House on the Prairie or something like that? It seemed to be that type of settlement to me. Or it seemed to be Mennonite, Pennsylvania Dutch. It was cloistered, but everyone knew everyone. They didn't lock any doors or anything. Everyone helped everyone. They were different than the environment surrounding them, but yet it was adhesive and kept them closer together. That was the picture I had. Then, of course, I grew up. And in modernity, I became a lawyer. I went into the Army. I eventually married. And at that time, there was a development on Palatina Lake, which was a couple of miles down the road from Alliance Colony. Alliance Colony was really gone by that time. We're talking about 1979, 1980. Alliance Colony itself, there were 2 or 3 people maybe who still lived in the area who had lived there when it really was thriving. So it was just like a quiet country ghost town. There were several old synagogues in the area, but I knew nothing of them. I started to raise a family. I had a little boy a few years old at that time, and one day, oh yes, there had been a novel written called Roots. And I read it, and everyone it whet the appetite of people at that time about their roots. And it did that with me. And so I said, I want to see where my father was bar mitzvah. And that would have been the Brotmanville Synagogue. So I hunted around. I spoke to my father. I said, how can I get a key, or who's in charge? He says, I don't know. So I drove out there one summer day in, I think, 1981 with my son. And I found the synagogue with a piece of twine or rope tied around the lock, and that's how it was being kept. So I undid it and went into the synagogue, and when I did, the sun was coming through the stained glass windows, and there was dust floating in the air, and I describe it as being ethereal at that time. And it just grabbed me. And it was obvious that it had been abandoned because the Torahs, there were 3 Torahs in the ark, and there were some silver ornaments on them. No one had been in there. No one touched anything. And this was the summer, and obviously the Torah covers being white, it must have been from the high holidays from the prior autumn. So it had been abandoned. I'll try and make a long story short, but the first thing that came to my mind was protect it. I called a rabbi in Vineland, told him what I had found. He came out, and we wrapped the Torahs in a tallis, each Torah in a tallis, which is a prayer shawl that they were hanging in there. you treat a Torah as though it's a person. And we wrapped them in this and took them to the synagogue in Vineland for safekeeping, along with some other items. And then thereafter, I tried to locate the last known members of the congregation and got a handful of them together and to determine what to do with the building, because I was an outsider. And I was also starting to be active on the Hever Kadisha, which is the Holy Brotherhood of the Alliance Cemetery, which oversaw the cemetery as a corporation, the burials there at the cemetery, and the Jewish laws that applied. And on the cemetery grounds, there was a building, a brick building. It was called the chapel. We still call it the chapel, but it's not really used as a synagogue. It was built in the 1920s. And it was used originally for services for funerals from out of town, if it was inclement weather, something of that nature. And I got the okay from them for me to bring the ark and the bema. The bema sits in the middle of the building, and it's where a Torah is brought down from the ark onto the bema. Everything then is facing east toward Jerusalem, and that's how the Torah is then read. So I reorganized the congregation, and we created a trust called the Brotmanville Trust. I tried to have the building moved to the grounds of the cemetery with their permission to preserve it, just historically, but couldn't do it because of overhead wires along the route, no more than a mile down the road. And so we decided we must sell, and to put the money from the sale then into a trust to maintain the chapel of the cemetery as the last resting place for these items that we were giving over. And we did that. And we sold. An African-American Baptist church bought it. They're still operating today. I took photographs of the interior to preserve all of that, and one of those photographs hangs in the chapel. And it kind of looks the same, except, of course, for the balcony up above where, you'll excuse me, the women would sit at the time. But I might say my grandmother had her own seat in the front up there, and if the rabbi made a mistake in his reading of the Torah, she would shout down the correction from above. And so we did all of that. And then it occurred to me that, you see, the colony was founded in 1882. In 1982, that would be 50 years, in Leviticus, one of the books of the Bible, it says that for 49 years you till the ground, and then the 50th year you declare a jubilee. The word for jubilee in Hebrew is yovel. So they declared a yovel in 1932, and they had this great reunion. They put out a booklet and so forth, and I thought, 1982 is 100 years. It's time to do it again. So I put together a small committee, and we contacted as many of the descendants of the area as we could possibly find. And again, long story short, in August, I think it was, we had about 2,000 people show up. Now, they weren't, 600 of them were descendants. The rest were people from Philadelphia in the area because we publicized the event, and we had feasting there. Put together a couple of buses, and I found my aunt and some other elderly people who knew where different things were, gave them a microphone, and the buses would drive around the area, do a loop of the area and say that's where this family was and that's where that family was. And it was in the mind's eye. And then we organized the Alliance Colony Foundation for the purpose of maintaining the history and preserving the history of the Alliance Colony. For a couple of years thereafter, I got volunteers to be docents, to come out there on Sundays and allow people to come in. We gathered together documents, old documents, deeds, old photographs from people's attics.
We're building the physical archive.
And we built a physical archive in the chapel. So there was an exhibit there for many years. And old implements, farming implements, and things of that nature to tell the story. Because it seemed to me, with my background and my then study of the area, from what I could find, this was a slice not just of Jewish history and immigration in this country, but of the overall mosaic of immigration. It was a piece of it, a tile, if you will. And it was, to me, a fantastic story. Here are these people who were not allowed to own land for 600 years. All of a sudden, they're in this experiment that they're going to be farmers in an area where they're wearing funny clothes and they speak a funny language and they have their different religion, and they're just dropped down in the middle of the moon. And it just, for them to survive, to do well, and then for their children to leave and flourish in society in America at a time when we didn't have all of the social programs that we have today. It was just the neighbor taking care of neighbor and the small government taking care of what they could. To me, it was kind of miraculous. And I thought that it's a story that really should be told. So we formed that Alliance Colony Foundation. After we formed the foundation, and as I say, for a few years then I didn't get volunteers anymore, okay? So it really turned into a one-man show because we were registered with the state formal, I don't know if it was historical library or something. Somewhere with the Secretary of State, we were registered as a historical society, and therefore people from not just the United States, but in other parts of the world, doing research on Jewish immigration in America, were in touch with me as president of the foundation, and I was sending them whatever materials I could send to them. But the area then went to sleep again. And I feared that people were losing interest, and I really didn't know what to do. And as I've said to other people, science came in to help me. All of a sudden, people started gaining interest again in genealogy. And they came out with these little kits from you could send away for, where you'd spit into a tube and send it away, and you'd find out about your ancestry. So that then, coupled with the internet, where a group was started for Alliance Colony by someone interested in Alliance Colony, those two things were like like a tonic, like a shot that really awakened a whole group of people who obviously were getting kind of the same feeling that I got when I walked into that synagogue on that sunny day. And it was, again, another miracle. Then a third miracle happened. A professor named Thomas Kinsella. I ran into him in Vineland at the Vineland Historical Society and was introduced to him by someone, a mutual friend, and he was interested. And he got Stockton University interested. And I got the Vineland, Jewish Federation of Cumberland, Gloucester, and Salem counties interested with their Vineland office. And they had always been very helpful. And eventually we did fundraising. We entered into an agreement. We came together to form the Alliance Heritage Center of Stockton, and we did fundraising, and here we are. And I can now, as I say, play a little bit more golf. I'm no more the one-man show. They are doing fabulously. They are doing what I wanted. There is outreach. They are telling the story of Alliance. They are preserving the history of Alliance. And it makes me feel wonderful. So that's the trip that I've been on from the 1970s, or for my whole life, until now. I don't know what else I can tell you.
Well, I am interested in a lot of things, but among them is digital humanities. And
What?
Digital humanities is that applying technology to history and literature and all that stuff.
University of Pennsylvania, I got the feeling they were going to put everything on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
Which would have been my last resort. But at Stockton, it isn't that way.
No.
No, this is very aggressive, affirmative, active.
And interactive.
Interactive, of course. I mean, to think of that these people who used to write to me from the West Coast or from Israel or from England asking for information can just click for it now is beautiful, is wonderful. I visited the office of the Alliance Israélite Universelle in Paris. And that's Alliance Colony was named after them because of their help in bringing about the influx into Alliance Colony. And I found on their shelves some material with regard to this little colony. At that time, that's all there was.
Really?
In the world about, I mean, a few people had written a few books. They had done some. And if you had those 3 or 4 books, you had everything that there was. Now what Stockton has put together, it's a godsend as far as I'm concerned, and I feel like my work is done.
Well, you did a great job, so.
I tried.
You really did a good job. Okay. Among my questions, we've kind of gone over some of them with your story, but I was curious if anyone had ever shared a recollection of when the family first arrived into South Jersey, if they ever had some kind of saying or something that may have been, I don't know,
You mean a recollection of what
of
the
what it
life
was like,
like?
of what it was maybe to travel the distance from New York to South Jersey. What did they?
Well, I can only tell you within my family, and my grandfather got there a couple of years after 1882.
Was it a carriage ride? Was it a train ride? How did they get there?
That I don't know. I can just tell you some of the stories I heard were of when he would look for work. He came by himself,
Okay.
leaving his wife and the children who were born in Ukraine, in Ukraine.
Okay.
And he, one story that was told was that he walked looking for work. Once all the buildings were built in Brotmanville that needed to be built, he walked with tools and a heavy overcoat in the cold weather to Mays Landing
Wow.
from Brotmanville. And along the way, it got warmer and warmer, and he got rid of his coat. But, I mean, you wouldn't even think of somebody doing something like that today. And then when he brought over the children and his wife, he built a home in Brotmanville for them, and he built a stable, and he built what they called a summer house. Of course, there was no air conditioning, so it was like the forget what they called it, at Alliance Beach. At Alliance Beach, there was a platform surrounded by screening and then a roof.
Okay.
So it was all screens, and then these flaps would come down if it rained to close it off.
Okay.
And he built that because in the summertime, all the meals would be served in that. It was like a screened-in porch, but very, very large. And that was in Brotmanville. When everything was built, there was no longer a need for a carpenter. So he took up the trade of a butcher, and he became the village butcher. And he would get up very, very early in the morning and cut the meat and wrap it in paper. And my father, as a child, when I say child, I mean 9, 10 years old, would hitch up Nellie, the horse, to the wagon and take the meat and deliver it to the villagers.
That was the big white horse, right?
Say again?
It was a white gray horse.
Yes, that was Nellie.
Yeah.
But before he would go, my grandmother would make him breakfast, and breakfast at that time was a staple. It was a sweet potato, because sweet potatoes would keep forever, and a hot sweet potato, that's what he had for breakfast. And then he would go and deliver the meat, come back, and then he would go to school. Eventually he went to Vineland High School for I think 2 years, and then Bridgeton High School, where he graduated at the age of 17. In those days, to be a lawyer, you didn't have to go to college. You didn't have to go to law school. He went to law school, but the way he got to law school was a little different. He first matriculated, paid $5 to go to the dental school. So he was going to become a dentist. And then there was a place in Norma called Norma Hall. It was Norma Athletic Hall. It had a proscenium stage, and there was a man hired to bring culture to the people of the village, and his name was Louis Monnier. And Professor Monnier would give lectures in there and show slides, these double slides that you would put in and give you a three-dimensional picture of what the world was like for these ignorant people, ignorant in the purest sense of the word. And my father, on one occasion, gave a speech there. He was, I guess, 17 years old. He had just was about to go to school. And a rabbi in the audience congratulated him afterwards and said, "You know, you should be a lawyer." Well, if a rabbi told you that, you better damn well listen to him, okay? So he got in touch with the University of Pennsylvania, and he switched his $5 from the dental school to the law school, and he graduated 3 years later, as a lawyer, but he couldn't take the bar because he wasn't 21 yet.
Ah.
I mean, those days were weird. He tells me the story when he went to law school. They gave him a razor to shave with, you know, a safety razor, and he couldn't shave it. He didn't know you had to put a razor inside. The people were, again, little John boy and Little House on the Prairie, and that's what they grew up with. As he described it to me, it was an innocent time, and it was a beautiful time. They just didn't know it. It was hard, very, very hard. You read some of the stuff that the people who went through it wrote. You got to realize how hard it really was. So those who made it through, God bless them.
For sure. Was there any advice that he gave you that you held on to as you were becoming a student, a man, a father? Or any bits of clever things that he shared? Advice, tidbits, wisdoms of wealth.
Well, no, he gave me advice as a lawyer.
Okay.
The best advice he ever gave me was, when you stand up in front of a jury, don't make a speech.
Okay.
Just talk to them. And I wish our politicians today would learn that.
I agree. Let's talk about the outdoor screened porch and the food that was served. Do you recall dishes that maybe you ate then that you might not eat now? Or were there special things that you really
not what I ate.
Oh,
You're
your father.
talking
I'm so
about
sorry. Your father, yes.
What they ate?
Yes.
No. I mean, they ate. Those in Europe didn't eat well.
No.
They didn't have the balanced diet of today. They didn't have the vitamins of today.
I guess I'm imagining because there's farming, so there's what was a lot of that sold to get some money, or were there bits of agriculture that were culturally important that they tried to grow? I know that there was talk about a black radish.
Oh, yes.
Become very
well, there
treasured.
were black radishes, there were white radishes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So different things like that. Were there any?
I remember eating white radish sliced with salt and bread and butter.
Huh.
I mean, that was
Simple.
something that they brought with them from that prior life. There was something that my mother called kabakla.
Okay.
A kabak in Yiddish, I think, is an eggplant. So it's eggplant relish, and she would make that. Hey, listen, I remember when I was a kid going to the shochetz. Do you know what a shochet is?
No. What's that?
That's a guy who kills animals,
Okay.
but kills them in the ritual fashion with a very, very, very sharp knife. I didn't understand it, but when it would be almost a Sabbath, and we'd have a chicken for dinner, and my mother we'd go out, get a chicken, take it to the shochet. Shochet would kill the chicken, and then my mother would pluck the chicken. So,
That's the way it was done.
Something else I think is important. Up until the first generation of children grew up, this was a vibrant community. Then, little by little, it died out. And the children would move their parents then into Vineland or into Bridgeton or into Philadelphia or wherever they moved to. It was a stepping stone. That's all it was. It was a one-generation stepping stone with some few exceptions. And it was a stepping stone that presented itself to a people who had been oppressed and were refugees. It was the perfect place. It was like a vacuum to suck in the next group of refugees from Nazism, because there were still people living in the area, a few, who spoke Yiddish. And the refugees from Europe after the Holocaust spoke Yiddish. So, and there were these few synagogues built in the area. And I always gave the analogy to when I was a child and we'd go on the boardwalk in Atlantic City and we'd buy hermit crabs. And you'd put them on a little leash and the hermit crab would walk. And hermit crabs, as they grow, they leave their shell and they find a larger shell. And that was what this was. It was a shell. And they came in and filled it for one generation. And then when their children grew up, the same thing took place. And they became Americanized. And that's all the same slice of American history.
Do you think it could happen again?
Sure.
Yeah?
It is happening again.
Okay.
It's happening now. Yeah.
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 Because I find it to be, the story seems to be one of healing. I mean, people were, as you were saying, suffering, oppressed, and then they get to a place where it's a natural landscape and it's almost a moment of breath, of be able to inhale and exhale and just feel safer.
Everything's relative. These people came from hell into what they considered mostly heaven. But to us, when we think and read about what their life was like, it was hell. Okay? Everything's relative.
It's true. It's true. I have no other questions. I feel like we've covered a lot of things, but do you feel like something I've missed that I should definitely talk about? I mean, I'd love to know maybe if there's something in the future that Stockton can do to make sure that we preserve the archive as it transforms from the physical status that you had put it together in, and now this digitized level where it's available in a global sense. So I wonder what else we could do. Are there other ideas you might have for us to try and use this material?
Digitized is good, but I still think that the personal touch, that there's a dynamic. I mean, like right now, most of my court appearances are on Zoom when it's with a judge. But there's a dynamic that you lose, that personal feeling. And when you put together a Zoom conference, it's just a little bit different than when you're all around a table together. I hope that we don't lose the personal part of it as well. I don't care if it's a traveling troupe or going an outreach type of program, that here we are, we're available, if you invite us, we will come, type of thing.
Retain that interactivity. Okay, okay, I like it.
Yes, just to maintain the interest. And then if they want to go on the computer, they can go on the computer. But just to whet their appetite.
It does seem as though it's transformed into this virtual community, which I think is kind of interesting because it was such a physical place, and then the diaspora had to spread out as it does, and now it's kind of all in this little virtual world, and it's nice. But to your point,
there was a time when, through the Federation, the Jewish Federation, a project was underway to create a little bat stow, a little Jewish bat stow there, if you know what bat stow is.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Okay. And I still have the plans and the drawings and everything else that went along with that. And I think we deluded ourselves into thinking that if you build it, they will come.
Huh.
I think this is so much better. So much better.
Well, there's so many parts to it. It's not there's this Alliance Colony, but there are also others that existed throughout the United States and even in Argentina, right?
Other colonies, Jewish colonies.
Yes.
There were
right?
several. I mean, Kansas, the
Canada.
Dakotas, Louisiana. There were a number of them. They didn't last. This was the first successful one.
Right. That's a testament.
Of course, on the pillar into the cemetery, it says this was the first one.
Gotcha.
We since found out it's the first successful one.
That still works.
Yeah.
Jay, let me ask you to give us a brief sketch for Cynthia of that cemetery. You've been in the Hebra Kadisha for 40 years, 50 years, and you've told me a few things. You've got you'll remember your phrasing where how everybody comes back finally. But also, I've always been interested in the old part of the cemetery morphing into the newer part, and maybe tell us a little bit about this. Is it Section 7 that you decided?
Yeah,
The
all right.
cemetery is a good story.
Within a couple of years of the founding of the colony, they incorporated the cemetery formally. They laid it out as you would lay out any building project. There was an original section of the cemetery, and as it grew, more land was acquired down the line. Mm-hmm. As I say, the Hebra Kadisha prepares the body for burial in much the same way as the Arabs prepare the body for burial, our cousins. The body is washed and it's buried in a plain white linen shroud. And there was a children's section. I mean, child mortality back in those days was quite high compared to what it is today. And there's a children's section. You'll find that there are little lambs in the children's section, that sort of thing. Well, you mentioned Section 7. It's a Jewish cemetery, so you had to be Jewish in order to be buried in the cemetery. To be Jewish by the Orthodox definition means that you're born of a Jewish mother, or you're converted, okay. One or the other. Reform, you can be born of a Jewish father as well. That has changed over the years with regard to the cemetery. In the last, 5 or 6 years, something like that, as the world changes, so we have to change to some degree. But we had to, and there's a lot of intermarriage today. And I felt that, and others felt that, it's like a Sophie's Choice. If you're married to a non-Jew, what do you do about this Jewish cemetery where everybody is coming back to, that is based upon the fact that only a Jew will be buried there? You owe an obligation to the person buried there in the last century not to break the law that they relied upon. So I got in touch with the hierarchy, if you can call it that, in New York of the seminaries, and got an opinion that if a section of a cemetery is a certain distance away and under certain circumstances and with certain restrictions, there can be the burial of non-Jews in that section. And undertook, along with others, to bring that before the board of the Cemetery Association and open up a new section there, so that someone is intermarried or intermarried, their children may be buried with them, so families can be together. And we call it the inclusive section. And we think we did a good thing.
Of course. We want to keep a family together.
Is that what you meant?
That's what I meant.
Okay.
What you meant. I actually might have a couple of other questions. Let me just double check my sheet here. Let's step back for a moment to the church, or not the church, I'm sorry, the synagogue.
Brotmanville Synagogue?
Brotmanville Synagogue. Mm-hmm. You stepped in. My question is this. When you entered and you wrapped the Torahs, did you realize that you were going to have such a long experience?
Not in a million years,
No.
No. This was simply a matter of, I came over here to see where my father was bar mitzvahed, and now I find that this place is abandoned, and there's silver ornaments hanging in here and everything, and thankfully no one has broken into the place or desecrated it or anything, but I can't leave it like this.
Right.
So I called a rabbi, and we did what we did. That was first aid. That was emergency care.
Sure.
Then thereafter, I said, well, I got to do something about the synagogue because it is where my father was bar mitzvah. So I felt an obligation to do something, and I might have even talked it over with my dad before I did something. He was my partner at the time, and that's when I got together with these people and put together
the next step.
The congregation.
So that must have been an interesting day for you because it set you on another path.
Yeah, one thing led to another. And then it led to the reunion, and then it led to my full involvement in the Harikadisha, and I've been involved in there. I mean, we have a meeting Sunday. You know, the day after tomorrow, our annual meeting. I mean, I'm still involved. So, yeah, one thing led to another.
It revitalized your connection to.
Oh, definitely. Once I got involved in the history of Alliance, it became an avocation of mine.
And that seems to be a theme that you are presenting, that idea that the book roots inspired you to look outward, and then you found something that was part of your life and it caused you to look outward even more. But that outward look actually brought connections to you, brought you a community back inward, which I think is
Exactly
kind of
right. You
clever.
said it very well.
I saw an engraving that Molly did. Is that right? There's a little engraving. That
The
was
copper?
Yes.
Yes.
So, can you tell me a little bit about that? It's a copper engraving. It looked like
No,
it could have
Molly
been.
Kravitz?
Yeah.
Molly Greenblatt Kravitz. Okay. It's another example of what came out of there. I mean, I could give you so many examples of the children that came out of there. I mean, her parents did not speak English, and she wound up being a teacher. But she was also very artistic. And one of the things that she used to do, in addition to painting, she also did crafts. And one of her crafts was copper work. And I remember as a child, when my parents went somewhere, they would bring me over to her house, and I'd spend the afternoon over there, and she would teach me. And she taught me how to do copper work, and I actually have one thing on a wall at home that I did under her tutelage. And you would take an old-fashioned clothespin, which was all wood, split at the bottom with a knob at the top. And you could use that as a tool to press copper sheeting, and other a pencil, a pen, anything. You would press the copper sheeting to raise the copper on the opposite side,
Okay.
and by putting a drawing on this side, and you would create the relief on the other side, and then the relief, sometimes you would dip it in acid to turn it green, and sometimes you wouldn't, you would just polish it. And she did that, taught me how to do it, and one of them she did and gave it to my father, justice, 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 and from the Bible, and it was hanging in my father's office, then in my office, and you've seen it.
Yeah.
It's available.
Yeah. We'd like to put it in the gallery when we build
That
a
would be
gallery.
very nice. Just let me know when, because right now I took it out of my office and gave it to the Beth Israel congregation to put in their waiting area, but let me know.
I'm going to ask one more question, I think. And that is, do you ever recall a book or a lullaby or a song that your parents sang to you as a child that you might care
That
to
came
share?
from
That came from the past, or maybe just was something that, you know, they latched onto from the area. I don't know. It could have been anything. Something. I know my mom's from Italy, so she always has this little song that she sings to me. So it's in Italian. That doesn't have to be the same thing. Or even a book or a poem.
You've got that, we've got it now, that bar mitzvah book that Sidney Bailey gave you.
Oh, okay.
Remember that? You wrote
Oh, he gave me a gift for my bar mitzvah of a book that had been written.
Right.
Yeah, I must admit I didn't read it for years thereafter, but then I did sit down and read it and enjoyed it.
It's downstairs for the students to read it.
But at a 13-year-old, I wasn't reading it.
Do you remember any weddings or grand events that your parents might have told
events?
you about? Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was an annual picnic.
Okay.
That was for the Jewish community of the area.
Oh, okay.
up until the post-war days, World War II, the Jewish community of the area was saturated with people who had come from the Alliance Colony, their children and themselves. Afterwards, it was increased by the refugees who came after the Holocaust, and the community, whether it was organized by one of the synagogues or what, I don't recall, would have an annual picnic somewhere.
Okay.
So you'd hear a lot of Yiddish spoken at that point in time. My mother, who was born in Russia, in Odessa, spoke a perfect Yiddish, even better than my father's, who grew up in the Alliance Colony. Yeah,
Interesting.
her vocabulary was very broad.
Which makes sense because she was correcting the rabbis. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, shall we?
Thank you very much for your time,
You're more
Jay.
than welcome.
This was
Thank
wonderful.
you for inviting me.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.